Our next subject for the study of skills in leadership. It's a simple story, it comes from the Bible. Now, being an amateur, you sort of have to take my way of putting it. But my parents made sure by the time I was about 19, I was a pretty good scholar, but I'm still an amateur. But there's a unique story in the Bible. It's called the parable of the story of the sower, S-O-W-E-R. The sower in the ancient days was the person that planted the crops, very simply. They got the ground ready, and the sower with a bag of seed would walk across the ground, sow the seed. That's how they got the crops going. And it's a very fascinating story, and it's got a lot to say, about our subject called the law of averages. There's some important points you'll pick up right away when you read the story. Here's number one. The sower was a wise man. A great advantage. Right? They didn't send a dummy out to plant. Number two, he was very ambitious. And by the time you finish the story, you'll come to the conclusion he was ambitious. Admirable quality. Ambition. Now that has to be tempered. One writer said, I've learned to be both ambitious and content. That's a unique place to finally arrive, to be both ambitious and content. But this story says the sower was very ambitious. Nothing wrong with ambition, as long as you work the right formula. The Bible probably gives the greatest formula for wealth and power. It says, be faithful over small amounts, and we'll make you ruler over much. Good philosophy. Which teaches us, number one, I think it's okay to wish to be a ruler. Nothing wrong with that. But here's how you become a ruler. Good stewardship when the amounts are small. The guy says, oh, if I had a fortune, I'd take good care of it, but I've just got a paycheck, so I don't know where it goes. I say, no. When we really check your faithfulness is when the amounts are small. I said to Mr. Schoaf when I met him at age 25, I said, you know, if I had more money, I'd have a better plan. He said, Mr. Rohn, I would suggest to you, if you had a better plan, you'd have more money. It's not the amount that counts. It's the philosophy that executes your plan that counts. If a child has $1, what should he do with it? It's very important. It's going to determine the rest of his life, what he does with $1. You say, well, it's just a child and it's just $1. We call that massive errors in judgment. It's only a child and it's only $1. What a colossal mistake to make in analyzing. If a child is allowed to spend the whole $1 and they don't have the sense of where that could take them, we call that the greatest disservice to a child. Not to explain to them the journey and the road you select when you spend the whole $1. So if a child wants to spend the whole $1, you say, no, you can't spend the whole $1. Child says, why not? Say, well, let me show you why not. And you take him to the other side of town and say, would you like to live here? Here's where the people live that spend all they make. Here's where they live. There's nothing better than visual to illustrate to a child. Show them the tragic circumstances. If you spend all you make, if you spend all you've got. And kids will come home with their big wide eyes. Say, would you like to live here? Would you like to live like this? Kid says, no, I wouldn't want to live here. Then you can't spend the whole $1. Okay, back to my story. The sower was bright and he was also ambitious. Number three, he went to work. It takes activity to furnish the labor that brings new life. Ideas without labor are stillborn. They never become tangible. They never become real. You got to put yourself through the activity, through the labor. So when you read the story, you'll find this was a hard-working sower. We call that admirable quality. Now, some interesting things that happened to the sower. It said he had excellent seed, point 4. He had the best. At least the scenario of the story says he had the best of seed. Boy, it's exciting when you feel that you're involved in the best product, the best service, the best idea, the best enterprise, something you feel proud about. Okay. But that's important, to have what you consider the best. Now, with all of these qualities, he starts out and now starts to unfold the scenario of life called the law of averages. Here's what happened. The sower goes out to sow the seed, and the first part of the seed that he sows falls by the wayside, and the birds get it. Now, I want you to understand the scenario. Here's what's very important for leaders to engage in: to teach the inevitable. It's very important to teach the inevitable. Key for leadership: leaders must understand birds. Why? Birds are going to get part of the seed. It's called inevitable. And if you don't teach inevitability, people will be all upset. They won't know what to expect. We must all be prepared for what we call eventualities, the inevitable. So here's part of the scenario. The sower goes out to sow the seed, and the birds get some. He sows some more seed, and the birds get it. Now, this is a typical story of life. Is that fairly typical? Fairly typical. The birds are going to get some of the seed. Some of you building an organization, right? You're out recruiting. Say, John, I've got an important story for you to listen to. Could be the change of your life, earn some extra money, or make it a full-time venture, whatever. But come and take a look. And he says, well, I think I'm ready for something like that. Thursday night, I'll see you, and let's go through it all. You say, wonderful. Comes Thursday night. John isn't there. You say, where is John? The birds. The birds. The birds. Who knows what form they come in? I don't know. It's called the inevitable. The inevitable. His brother-in-law said, sales? You're not going to get mixed up in sales. Who told you you were a salesman? All kinds of stuff that talk people out of a good idea. I don't know. Now, when the birds get some of the seed, you got one of a couple of choices. Number one, you can chase birds. You say, well, I'll go straighten this out. Well, here's the problem if you go try chasing birds to straighten things out. You have now left the field. And the law of averages isn't going to work for you anymore till you get back to the field. This is so important to know. What to spend your time on and what not to waste your time on. There's two ways to have the tallest building in town. One is tear all the other buildings down. Right? Now yours is the tallest. But we call that the hardest of tasks. Right? You might get the first one down, right? The guy's gone. You got his building down. The next one, right? Maybe not be that difficult. But about the third building you start for, a guy standing out in front. And he says, I've heard about you. Formidable, right? Now you got some problems because you're not known as a builder. You're known as a wrecker, a destroyer. You put everything down to try to make you look good. We call that massive errors in judgment. The best thing to do is to spend your energy and time on the things that count and understand the law of averages. Okay? And not chase the birds, but to stay in the field. Here's what it said the wise man did. He ignored the birds, and he kept on sowing. Why? He was so bright, he understood the law of averages. Now, here was some more of his experiences. Now he keeps on sowing the seed. Now the seed falls on rocky ground, and the soil was shallow. We call this inevitable. I don't know how to miss this. This is called the stuff of life. It's so important to understand the seasons and the stuff of life and the ratios and the inevitables. This is so important, especially as a leader, so that you can help people through understanding how it is. This is called one of those things. And it said this time the seed takes root and the little plant starts to grow, but the soil is so shallow that the first hot day, the little plants wither and die. You say, wow, what a disappointment. Well, sure, you're going to be disappointed. Some people are going to try so little, even if you've got a good idea. 30 days later, you say, we had this meeting, John wasn't here. So where is John? I said, I don't know. You say, well, I thought sure John would last 30 days. But he didn't. Why? It's called inevitable. Right? And who knows the reason why? John isn't here anymore. Somebody said, boo. And he quit. He quit. First hot day. Now, you're going to be disappointed, especially if it's somebody you like, somebody you know. But here's what you must learn to do as a leader. Discipline your disappointment. This is part of the challenge of life, disciplining the disappointment. Understanding the law of averages. Now, here's what it said the wise man did. He kept on sowing. How brilliant. He was so well schooled in the law of averages. Now he keeps on sowing, and this time the seed falls on thorny ground. You say, well, how much of this ground can you get? Well, just hang on. It's not the end of the story. Now this time he sows the seed, it falls on thorny ground, and the little plant starts to grow, but the thorns choke it to death, and it dies. Wow, what's this called? the inevitable. Do you know what the story called the thorns? The cares of life, little cares. Who knows the excuses some people use for not pushing on through and getting the job done? It's called inevitable. Some people are going to try so little. They're going to let other things crowd out the good opportunities. And who knows why? I don't know why. I'm an amateur on this stuff. The key is to take the inevitable and take the obvious, right? Everybody should take obvious 1, obvious 2. Right? Study the obvious and not let it unduly disturb you, and learn to manage the obvious so you can get on with the more important things in life. Who knows? I called John up. I said, John, where were you last night? We had this meeting. John says, well, I can't make every meeting. I say, why not? John says, well, I got a lot of other things I got to do. I say, what are they? You won't believe the list John gave me. The backyard fence was sagging and the dogs are about to get loose. You just can't let your dogs run loose. I say, okay, John. John says, the screen door came off the hinges. And you just can't let things fall apart. You got to take time, keep things fixed up. I say, okay, John. Some extra trash had piled up in the garage. You just can't let mountains of trash take over. You got to take care of your trash. I say, okay, John. On the phone, I can hear the thorns going, oh. Some people have the incredible ability to major in minor things. I don't know why. We call this inevitable. We call it a mystery. It's part of the scenario of life. I'm driving through the little community. John's out there mowing his lawn. He's cussing the weeds, and he's red in the face, and he's about to explode. I said, John, what are you doing? He says, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm mowing this lousy lawn. I said, John, there's all kinds of little neighborhood boys around here. Mow your lawn. He says, they want $5. I'll mow it myself. I'll mow it myself. Okay, John. Okay. Number one, there should be a law against cheating some little neighborhood boy out of $5. Now, why the scenario? The scenario of the story of the sower is to prepare us for the inevitable called the law of averages. Now here's what it says. The sower kept on sowing. He was so bright, evidently he'd been schooled in these numbers of about how many are going to let the birds, and about how many the hot weather's going to take, and about how many are going to let little things cheat him out of big chances. Right? He must have gone through the school because he understood. He kept on sowing. Now here's what it says. The seed falls on good ground. Let me give you a promise as a leader. It always will. Key phrase. If you share a good idea often enough, it'll fall on good people. Why? The law of averages. Now, even the good ground had a variety of productivity. It said part of the good ground produced 30%. Wow. And it said part of the good ground produced 60%. Terrific. And it said part of the good ground produced 100%. What's that called? The law of averages. That's the way it is. It's called one of those things. Now, can you find some 100%ers? The answer is yes, but you got to go through the birds and the hot weather and the thorns and cares, and you've got to find some way to use the 30%ers and the 60%ers. And if you become entrusted as a skillful leader and learn the law of averages and learn how to deal with all this, you'll have some 100%ers to deal with, to work with. The law of averages. As leaders, let's learn to help people not just with their jobs, but with their lives. I think we have a twofold responsibility to help people with job skills. But I think the greater responsibility is to help people with life skills. Let's don't just teach people how to work, let's teach people how to live. How to assimilate and accumulate. Far greater treasures than just a paycheck. The treasures of awareness, understanding, setting goals, reaching into the future, growing, changing, expanding. Let's talk about team building. Understanding now in some of this background, the law of averages, let me give you, I think, what are some good scenarios to understand about putting a good team together, looking for good people. If you want to build a championship team, that's quite a challenge. How to build a successful team of people to accomplish some purpose. If you've got something in mind, whether it's enterprise or organization or whether it's church or whether it's sports, doesn't matter what it is. If you want to find good people, here's part of the challenge in finding a successful team of people. Jesus had the same purpose, right? And you can't hit them all. Jesus says, I'll take you. And that was Judas. I mean, you can't hit them all. Anyway, to put together a good team, I've got a checklist for you. It's got 4 parts to it. Here's number 1, history. It's not a bad idea to check history. Somebody's qualifications to do the job. Just take a look. Now, we can't go into too much detail on any one of these, but let me just give you the list. Number 2, check interest. If somebody's interested, they're probably a good prospect. Now, sometimes people can fake their interest. But if you've been a leader for a while, you can be a pretty good judge of whether or not somebody is faking you out on what we call true interest. And you just have to have some face-to-face conversation just to check out to the best of your ability. You won't hit it every time, but you can get pretty good at checking what we call true interest. A group came to Jesus one day and said, we wish to be disciples. He said, gentlemen, you've put your story on the wrong man. They said, wow. He said, unfortunately, I can read your heart. They said, oh. They didn't want to be disciples. They had all kinds of trickery in mind. But he picked up on it right away. And he wasn't faked out by the we wish to be. Now, you might not get quite this good at reading hearts, but I'm telling you, you can get pretty good as a leader in judging somebody's what we call true interest. Here's the third part of the checklist. Check response. Response tells you a lot about someone's integrity and character and interest and skill. If someone says, you have to get there how early? You have to stay how late? The break is only 10 minutes. 2 evenings a week? Saturdays? That give you any clues? These are called clues, right? Don't go past these clues. Clues on what we call response. A person's response quickly illustrates their philosophy. We only respond based on what we know, and our attitude and philosophy is so bound up. And we might, be clever for a while, but pretty soon response is going to come truly from our philosophy. And if there's any great errors there in philosophy and attitude, here's one of the places where it shows up in response. And here's the last piece of the checklist in putting together a good team. Check results. Finally, the name of the game is results. How else are we going to judge? That's the final judge. Results. It is the name of the game. Results must soon match quality. You might have a nice guy, but finally you got to have results. Nice don't get it. Now there's 2 parts to results. Here it is. Number 1, activity results. Sometimes we don't ask for productivity right away. All we ask for first is activity. Now it's pretty easy to check activity. If you joined a sales organization and you're supposed to make 10 calls first week, it's pretty simple on Friday, right? Pretty simple on Friday. Say, John, how many calls did you make? John says, well. You say, John, well won't fit in my little box here. And John starts on a story. And you say, John, the reason I made this box so small is so a story won't fit. I just need an activity number from 1 to 10. Now, if the results on activity first week are not good, those have got to be signals, clues. Now, you might try another week, but you got to be the judge, right? How far you go in putting a team together with somebody's lack of precise activity. Now, finally, here's the last part, productivity. Finally, the tree must have figs, finally. The ultimate test of a quality team is productivity. Fruit, evidence, measurable progress in reasonable time. Now, as a leader, you've got to learn to measure results and productivity and activity. And here's part of the skill of leadership. Be upfront in team building with what you expect. Don't let the surprises come later. Put it up front. God was very upfront. Old Testament. God says, if you move toward me, I move towards you. See, that's very upfront. That's called making it fairly clear. You take a step, I step. Now, I only ask you to take human steps. I take God steps, you take human steps. But you got to take a step. Because here's how else it reads. You don't move, I don't move. You say, well, that's arbitrary. Well, when you're God, you can set it up that way. When you get your planets, you can set it up however you want to. This one is set up. I got a good philosophical statement for you. Life was designed to respond, to deserve, not to need. On this planet, it doesn't read, if you need, you will reap. No, it reads, if you plant, you will reap. You say, well, I really need to reap. Then you really need to plant. Life wasn't designed for the needers. Life was designed for the planters. Life doesn't respond to what we need. Life responds to what we deserve by activity, belief, faith, action, movement. You gotta take a step. So one of the things to make clear when you're bringing somebody on board is say, Mary, if you step, we do these things. If you take 3 steps, we go this, this, and this, and this. And if you do this, we do all of this. But if you don't move, we don't move. It's very important to make it clear. Why? Because everybody needs to pay. Everybody needs to pay. Even if the payment is only token, it has to be paid. Because life responds to deserve, not need. Fascinating study. Here's one of the clues to leadership. Learn to work with the people who deserve it, not the people who need it. Now, we're talking team building now. We're talking winning a championship. We're talking putting together an enterprise. And the key to leadership is teach people how to deserve it. Teach them how to take the steps. Teach them how to make the moves. And we only ask for token moves. We only ask for limited activity. We only ask for steps in the right direction. But without the steps, we have no promise. So this is one of the most important things you can do for children, is to teach them how to deserve good things, how to deserve the favors, right? You got to pay the price. Price is how you deserve it. Here's the next key. In building a successful team, you must learn when you've got too many. It's a simple story. It comes from the Bible. Now, being an amateur, you sort of have to take my way of putting it, but good Lord said, just take my word for it, you got too many. And Gideon said, well, what should I do? And the good Lord said, try this. Get the 32,000 troops together and give them your last final ringing speech. We're off to fight the Midianite. Something like that. And he said, when you finish the speech, finish it like this. Now then, that we're off to fight, if there's anybody here that's afraid and you think we're about to lose this battle upcoming with the Midianites, you can be excused this time, go home, can't use you this time. Gideon said, clever, should have thought of that myself. Gets the 32,000 troops together, gets up, gives his last ringing speech and says, we're off to fight, but if there's anybody here who thinks we're going to lose, you can be excused this time. You can just go home. We're just going to take what's left. And Gideon waits. And sure enough, some went home, and the number was 22,000. Gideon says, wow. Hey, if you've got 32,000 and 22,000 think you're going to lose, guess what? You're going to lose. You got too many. Here's the key to leadership. In haste, it's possible to recruit losers. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's possible. You say, well, why is that? This is called one of those things. When you're moving, no telling who you collect, right? So here's part of the test, you know. Who thinks we're going to lose? You can be excused this time. So Gideon's got 10,000 left. He says, no problem, we'll do it with 10,000. Good Lord says, well, you still got too many. Gideon says, well, what now? And the good Lord says, try this. March the 10,000 till they're hot and thirsty down by the river, and those that are careless just drop their shield and spear and dive in the water and start drinking. You can't use them, they're too careless. But the ones that keep the spear and the shield and lap the water like a dog, keep looking and alert, those are the ones because they're trained and ready to go. Gideon said clever. And he marches the 10,000 till they're hot and thirsty down by the river. Sure enough, when he gets to the river, some are hot and careless, and they just throw down their spear and shield and jump in the water. And the number was 9,700. Key to leadership. In haste, it's possible to recruit the careless. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's inevitable. This is called one of those things. Now, if you've got an important battle, you got to know who's careless. And this was part of the test. So Gideon says, you 9,700, home. And he sent them home, dripping home. Now he's got 300 left. Gideon said, no problem. From 32,000 to 300, Gideon is still willing to try it. We call that courageous leadership. You've got to read the story. Don't have time to give you the whole scenario, but it was a fascinating story. With 300, the battle plan was the most strange, unusual battle plan ever designed. But he won the day, chased off the Midianites. Gideon becomes the military Jewish hero of the day. His story provided for us to read one more time, which says, as a leader, remember, there are times when you may have too many. This is called inevitable. Next, don't linger too long. If you've got a job to do, sometimes you have to be fairly swift in your analysis of who will and who won't and who can and who can't. Jesus said, in putting the Christian philosophy to work, two of you take a city, and you two take a city, and you two take a city, and walk into the city and tell the story. And if they respond fairly soon, stay, and if they don't respond fairly soon, don't stay. He advised them to leave the city that didn't respond fairly soon. So you got to put some time. Now, you got to be a judge of how much time you give someone to respond or something to respond. This is part of the unusual skill of leadership, learning time dimensions, how much time to give. But Jesus was fairly clear, said, don't stay too long. If the city doesn't buy the story, he said, leave. And I think the reason was fairly clear. There are too many cities that will to linger with those who won't. It's called the law of averages. Play the law of averages. Don't stay too long. Now, he gave them some other fascinating instructions that who knows what it all meant. He said, when you walk out of one of these cities that doesn't buy the story, wipe off your shoes. Whatever that meant in those days. No telling what that meant. If you walked out of somebody's house and wiped off your shoes, I mean, no telling what that meant. There's probably some modern gestures that are just as good, but, you know, who knows? I don't know. I'm an amateur on this stuff. So.